welcome to today's Cybersecurity Threat Report. Today is August 11th, 2011. Joining us today, we have John Hogoboom. John is a recognized expert in security analysis and an analysis tool developer. Welcome, John. What do you plan to discuss today?
Hey, Brian. Today I have 5 new Android Trojans to discuss. No surprise that it's Android again, so we'll go through some of those.
Great. And I understand we've done yet a number of more APT notifications to customers, and there's been a lot of discussion and frenzy in the media about that. That's getting pretty busy, isn't it?
It's getting very busy for us. It has been anyway, but even more so as we're, some of these published reports has helped us kind of expand our view of what we already understood. So that's getting us a lot more intelligence into it, and we have been making a lot more customer notifications based on that information as well.
That's good news. I think we're still kind of trying to figure out the best way to share information with our customers about the insights that we've got here, but hopefully we'll have some developments on that in the future. So thanks. Also with us today, Patrick McCanna. Patrick is a key member of our Mobility Threat Awareness and Response team. Welcome, Patrick, and what do you plan to discuss today?
Today I'm going to just do the Black Hat Defcon roundup. We had about 7 folks that attended both conferences, and we're going to talk about what we thought was interesting from the event.
All right, great, thanks. And we have Nancy Grover here. Nancy is a senior member of our cybersecurity team. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi.
And I expect that you're going to be interacting with us through the discussion today. Is that correct?
Right. I just hope to ask some intelligent questions along the way.
Great, thank you. And I'm Brian Rexroad, and my role is to help make what we learn from our security analysis, our threat analysis, and then use that to help improve our services to customers and ultimately to help our customers. So if you have feedback on our program or if you have questions or recommendations on things that we should discuss, please contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. So let's go ahead and start with you, John. What's happening with the Android Trojans?
All right, so we had 5 new ones emerge. One is kind of a rehash of one that we already talked about last week, but there's a slight twist to it, so we're going to go over that and how that's a little bit different. So a few that we have here is there's some new Droid Dream Lite variants. We've talked about Droid Dream before. There's also Droid Dream Lite, which I don't know if we covered as much, but there's some new variants of that, so we'll cover that. Another one, Partner Tracker 2011 Deluxe. This is just another Trojan app that purports to be some kind of contact manager tracking type of thing. Iconosys SMS is another just Trojan app that's, and I believe both of these might be on alternate marketplaces. I don't have a lot of intelligence on the second and third one here. Coin Pirates is another one, and then NikiBot, which is kind of a variation of Niki Spy, which Dave covered last week. So real quick, I got some slides to show on this. Droid Dream Lite variants that are out there, these were put onto the Android marketplace, but they're very quickly removed by Android, so they don't expect that a lot of people actually got any chance to install these, so the exposure is probably very limited. It does some very common things, transmits the IMSI, the model of your phone, the API that you're running, up to a command and control server. It also downloads a secondary payload, and then it receives additional instructions for that command and control server. It will check in there regularly to download additional software. It will pop up new web pages that it might be instructed to, which could be some kind of attempt to boost up page views on certain things. I'm not sure what they're doing that for, but that's just a guess. It can also update its configuration. So that's one to keep an eye out for. The next one, this one was... Sure.
Sure. Back on that other one, because there was such a limited number of apps that were distributed with that, why is that? Because do you think somebody reported it right away? Or, how do you think the Android people became aware of it so quickly and were able to pull it down so quickly?
I don't have exact intelligence, although I know there are some vendors in this space that do security auditing of apps. Okay. I know that's how we were alerted to it. It may be via that channel or via some other channel that I'm not aware of. It was about 10 apps in total from what they reported. I'm only showing a few here. But again, they are not available anymore, so it's not anything to worry about. The next one, Coin Pirates, is there's a legitimate game out there called Coin Pirates that you can download. This is a Trojan version of that. It's distributed on alternate marketplaces, I think mostly in China marketplaces. So probably less likely unless if you turn that on your phone to be able to install apps from alternate marketplaces, then you might want to be wary. If you haven't, you're probably a lot less likely to get this one. Does some stuff. It transmits to the IMEI, MSI, et cetera, like all the other ones do for the most part. It also will selectively capture incoming SMS messages based on keywords inside of those, which is interesting. A lot of the old ones that are ones that we've seen before, you're usually consuming SMS messages from a particular target or and just consuming them in general. This one will only consume it and hide it from the user if it has certain keywords in it.
So are these SMS messages that say if I was sending you a text, inviting you out to dinner or something, it's even looking at those, or are these specific to SMS messages between your phone and this app or this Trojan?
I don't know for sure because I actually haven't analyzed this one myself. I suspect it might just be from the operator to your phone, an SMS, but it could be keywords in general from anybody. And there are some rules in there, whether it wants to delete it or upload it to a server. So it could be something where they're looking for certain keywords and letting you see them as the Android phone user, but also uploading those to a command and control server. I'm not sure, though, because I actually haven't done the analysis. The analysis of this was a little vague in the report that I read.
So, but I think we've seen this kind of thing in the past, John. And in particular, I think we've seen some cases where, perhaps not in the mobile area, but certainly in the web activity area where certain URLs get triggered for being forwarded to botnets, and oftentimes that's being used, for example, to out keywords associated with financial institutions that the users are using, picking out words like bank, for example. I can't say that that's part of this particular Trojan, but if they can, in many cases, the operators or the creators will use these Trojans to actually survey what kinds of, if they're going after a financial institution, for example, to survey what institutions might be good targets based on the victims they've infected.
Are you getting any new insight into why they're targeting these particular data points, the IME, MC? I mean, for me as a mobile person, it's very immediately obvious why I would want to use that data for proximity-based attacks. And I can infer some insight here, but I'm just curious as to if you have something before I opine on why people might be targeting that data.
I think typically speaking, the folks that are generating these things are looking for methods to provide a good inventory of who they have that's infected. And I think those identifiers provide information that's unique to that individual. So that if they, for example, if the Trojan gets cleaned out and they infect that user once again, they'll be able to recognize that they've a reinfection situation, or they'll be able to use that for inventory purposes going forward. So we've seen that sort of thing where they've actually generated or assigned serial numbers associated with, regular computer platforms and botnet tracking. And my guess is that it's a similar kind of scenario. And that's consistent with the API level as well, to see what sorts of features will be available that they could potentially take advantage of. Yeah. And what's interesting, too, is, a best practice is to use device ID. All of these platforms have a device ID construct. Mm-hmm. But what tends to happen in the developer community is people ignore that, and then they choose to go with IME and IMSI as well as developer ID. So if you've got services that are floating out there that are using IME and IMSI as some kinds of authenticity or identity, these kinds of botnets would potentially be able to exploit it if you don't have proper controls in place as well. But I didn't really think about the transitioning for IME and IMSI if the device goes through an upgrade. It'd be interesting to know. I guess I should know this. I'll have to do some research offline to figure out if you go from, for example, 2.1 to 2.2 in Android, if there's any risk that
your device ID might change over time. Going for IME and MZ would potentially be static.
Okay, very good. One of the last things I wanted to mention, the report I read does have some information. If you think you might be infected, if you downloaded Coin Pirates from someplace other than the official Android marketplace, or even if you have it in general, you might just want to check this. Just go to Settings, Applications, Running Services on your phone, and check for the existence of something called Monitor Service. If that's there, then you probably want to remove Coin Pirates. You can also do that manually. I don't remember the exact steps to go through, but that's something you can manually remove from your phone, move the actual Coin Pirates application. The last one that I had here, this is a rehash of what David kind of talked about last week. He mentioned the Nicky Spy software, which it's a similar type of application. It installs on your phone. It allows you to record the phone calls or the surrounding conversation in the room and actually upload those to a server. And actually, there's some small variations, tweaks to this. The big one is that this one is now fully controlled by SMS. So once it's installed on the phone, someone can send SMS messages to issue commands to it to say, send me the call log data, send me the person's current GPS location, send me a WAV file or a recorded audio file of what's going on in the area for the next 10 seconds. Interesting that you can do very specific messages via SMS at certain times when you're interested. I don't know if the tracking of GPS location was mentioned last time in Dave's report. That's another one I thought was interesting. And I think all the other ones he might have mentioned. Uploading of the contact list is another function it'll do, your phone call logs, and all the SMS messages that you received.
So for these SMS messages to actually complete a command, is there some underlying script then? How is it really doing that?
So there's a Trojan that's running on the machine, or on the phone, sorry.
I get it, and then the SMS is...
He's watching all the SMS messages that come in. If keywords in there that he's looking for, and actually I have a page that lists all of those keywords that he's looking for, he will consume that SMS message and hide it from the user. And then he actually takes action based on whatever that command instruction is to do. And the Trojan app, take action based on the command.
Remember years ago when computers were first getting like the internal mics and, of course, the webcams and things like that, but that there were Trojans out there that could do kind of that same thing, turn on a webcam or turn on the mic and start listening in. It almost sounds a little bit like that in a way.
Very similar. One of the very first, and that was quite a while ago, was called Back Orifice, if I remember right. And it had a lot of that functionality to turn the audio on, turn your camera on, record what's going on. Since it's been modified quite a bit to allow all kinds of other functions as well. But I agree, it's a very similar type of functionality.
All right. So, again, I guess this is, I think we had talked about this last week as well. This is a case where I don't think this particular piece of software is hiding the fact that it does these things. If I understand correctly, it's not really a Trojan piece of software that portrays itself as one thing and does things as another. The concern here is that this might get installed on your device. It has a lot of sort of spy capabilities, and if it gets installed without your awareness, then certainly that would be a bad thing.
Right.
Okay, so thank you very much, John. That was a very good rundown of some of the updates. We expect to see more of this kind of thing in the future as well. Next thing we will discuss here is Patrick will give us a sort of a rundown on the Defcon and Black Hat activities.
So for our team, we generally go, at AT&T, we have a team of about 7 people that went this year. And we, in advance, we make a list of presentations that are potentially going to be interesting for our business. And then we try to divvy up responsibility for who's going to be attending which projects, or which presentations, so that we can quickly respond if there's something new that we hadn't anticipated. This year, I'm very happy to report it was a very quiet year. The past 2 years, I felt like a very, very thin piece of paper afterwards, trying to keep all of the plates spinning and the balls in the air in terms of response activities. So in 2009 and 2010, we saw a lot of preliminary or first-in-class demonstrations of remote code execution on handsets or attacks against fundamental parts of the protocols that we implement in the mobile environment. And so that required a lot of heavy lifting on our part to try to respond. This year, we didn't see so much of that. It was a lot more iterative in nature. And so I'm going to talk about kind of the mobile component, at least 3 presentations where you guys can go offline and review material that I think is worthwhile. The rationale is has anything changed as a result of what happened at Black Hat? Well, here are 3 presentations for mobile, and I have a few for the rest of the world that I think are going to be useful. They may change your perspective on where the state of the art is for security today. So on the mobile side, there are 3 presentations, one called War Texting by Don Bailey at ISEC Partners. And this presentation got a lot of press. In it, they demonstrated a machine-to-machine connection against a car. And they were able to compromise the security system for the car so they could remotely unlock the car and actually remotely turn the car on. So it's a really, punchy, very visceral demonstration that shows kind of in a always connected world where you have cars with either GSM or CDMA modems. If they don't have adequate controls in place, there are some interesting consequences that can happen. And so it really shouldn't be shocking to people that there are mistakes that are made, and sometimes people don't invest enough in security. The presentation's getting a lot of interest because of that angle, but what I think is more interesting is Don worked with Nick DiPetrillo in past years on a presentation called We Found Carmen Sandiego. And using trusted third-party connections on the SS7 network, they discovered that some operators exposed APIs that allowed you to, for example, locate the physical region of a subscriber based on their phone number. And they were also able to do things like determine what kind of device that the subscriber had based on the phone number that was assigned to them. And so if I think about like the evolution of network security and what our opponents are trying to do to our networks, there's 3 stages. There's footprinting, there's the actual penetration and the exfiltration of data, and then covering the log data. And in the mobile world, we've had a lot of work on actual compromise of devices and code execution. But we have not had a lot of activity so far on the footprinting and analysis space, specifically around MISDNs and how phones work. And so Don Bailey's presentation is interesting from that perspective, and I would encourage folks to, put a set of glasses on when they're reading it and make sure that you don't get too excited about the car hacking perspective and think a little bit more about what it might mean to do footprinting of an entire enterprise based on MISDNs and phone numbers alone.
Well, Patrick, when I see that title, I was imagining, and it was something completely different, because you remember, initially there was war driving and, that sort of thing. So you were driving around looking, or there was war dialing, I guess, first, looking for phone numbers to corporations, and then war, the driving, looking for open Wi-Fi. So when I see war texting, it almost makes me wonder, is that using that same sort of thing where you're just sort of wandering around trying to find some sort of open connection? Is he presenting that, like you could drive around and find some vulnerable cars or anything, or that has absolutely nothing to do with the war?
Thematically it's similar, but
okay.
What's different here is Don demonstrates using open source hardware projects to actually take machine-to-machine devices, taking, my electronics knowledge is still weak here, taking meter readers, what do you call those?
Meters?
Voltmeters, taking voltmeters and actually sitting down with hardware and measuring, where are their connections on a device, and then trying to connect them to another device that may be able to translate a serial connection and start looking at what devices are sending out. And so there's, in the last couple of years, there's been a real interesting growth in the hardware hacking community. And this stuff is not hard. You can go buy these open source kits, and you can start learning how to build little robots and blinking lights. And it's not very long before you can actually start walking things backwards.
Right. At last year's Defcon, I went to a couple of hardware hacking classes that were really pretty interesting. Made me want to go out and buy one of those Arduino boards and go back to Radio Shack and get some stuff, though I never did.
Oh, well, we'll get together and we'll start doing it. I'm doing it with my daughter. We're going to build a little bear that talks. So,
nice.
I highly encourage you to get into it. Dawn's presentation really starts from like, hey, I'm more of a CS background type of individual. What can I do to get into hardware hacking? He started doing this, and then he went and bought these machine-to-machine devices and started walking them backwards, started discovering that, the exchanges that were happening over SMS did not have a lot of security controls. And so I think this is a pretty important development. In the past, I have always held these hardware hackers on a pedestal. These people have always seemed like wildly out of the norm in terms of intelligence. But now there is so much business around easy-to-build hobby kit electronics, and there are so many tutorials out there that this realm is becoming far more accessible. And I think people need to really take hardware hacking very seriously.
Yeah. A few years ago, I built that. I saw the instructions for the Pringle can antenna so that you could find open Wi-Fi. So you actually built an antenna out of a Pringles can, and it was like $1.96. Well, maybe it was more like $5.96. In parts at Radio Shack. That was a really fun project and kind of fun to, point it at people's houses and at businesses and find all that open Wi-Fi. So it is fun to do.
Just to put this into perspective here, specifically on the using SMS for control activities, SMS wasn't designed for that purpose. And one of the challenges as a practical matter that exists, and that was actually what I found to be personally one of the most interesting things about this particular study, is that to add cryptographic protections to that control messaging in SMS is really not a very practical matter. That is, SMS is constrained in terms of the size of the messages. Adding cryptographic controls on that to protect that information would make it a much larger message size, which would not be very compatible with SMS as it is today. So personally, the hope is that as we move forward into LTE and the messaging structure that SMS provides moves into an IP-based network, we should be able to, as a network, provide better support for these types of applications going forward. Pointing out, by the way, that the issues that they identified are not a network issue. They're really an issue with the way the networking service is being used for control purposes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this was an unfortunate design decision. Secrets should be kept secret, and you should take effort to keep your secrets secret. So when you have 160 bits to work with or 140 bits to work with, and state-of-the-art is 128-bit encryption, what are you going to do? You're going to have a one-letter encrypted? I mean, it's just not really very practical. So there are ways that people can develop this stuff, and what hopefully you'll see more from AT&T is we'll be doing better developer guidance to help people who are making machine-to-machine solutions aware of what the threats are and knowledgeable about how to protect themselves, specifically by migrating secrets away from SMS as transport.
So what else do you have here?
So mobile side, there's the femtocell presentation that came out, and just very briefly, what this was is there was some folks from Europe, Ravi, Nico, and Kevin. They had acquired a femtocell device that had inadequate security controls, and it did not appear that there was a lot of rigor around ensuring that a hardware hacker wouldn't be able to compromise the device. So, for example, updates to the device, they had to come from a server that uses a certificate, but the actual device itself did not inspect the certificate to validate that it was the right one. So you could, set up your DNS entry in your home network, and then point it to a web server and then make sure you configured the downloads to have an SSL certificate associated with it. But, it could be, www.patrickmccana.com as the signer, and the platform would still accept these updates. And so that enabled a lot of interesting things. And then the last on the mobile track, the company Lookout, they did an interesting presentation about the Android security patch lifecycle. I can't guarantee you if you get a chance to see the videos, it wouldn't necessarily qualify for like David Letterman material, but like in terms of raw data, what they are providing is statistics around how long it takes to get to 50% patch for a particular instance of a device. So let's say you've got 2.1 Android devices floating out there for HTC, Motorola, and Huawei. What they do is a pretty rigorous analysis of their user base that shows, in the case of HTC, it took N days to get to 50% of the population patched to 2.2. In the case of Huawei, it took Z days. In the case of Motorola, it took N days. And so these are raw statistics that are very difficult to come by. And for an enterprise, it may be interesting to you if you are concerned about patch levels as some kind of a reflection of security for your subscribers. This might be helpful for you in determining, which platform is going to be the most appropriate platform for you.
Good.
So on the general side for Black Hat, there were two presentations that I thought were potentially changed the way that we think about the Internet. The first was a presentation by Moxie Marlinspike called SSL and the Future of Authenticity. And for those who are unaware, Moxie has been very vocal and active in the security industry for the last 3 years, presenting techniques to, basically demonstrating that SSL has some problems. And this year, Moxie chose to take a bit of a different path, which is to propose an alternative solution. So SSL is supposed to provide secrecy, integrity, and authenticity. But in general, SSL has been, as an industry, the certificate authorities have been focusing on authenticity and maybe foregoing some of the integrity and secrecy. That has resulted in an effort to get DNSSEC implemented so that we can have the authenticity story really focused over in DNSSEC land, and then hopefully get more of the integrity and the secrecy situation resolved in SSL's world. Well, Moxie has observed that the parties that are responsible for the problems in SSL, the certificate authorities, are the same parties that are going to be managing both DNSSEC as well as certificate authorities for the near future. So what he's proposed is something called convergence, which gives end users the ability to control who they trust. So you can say, I like this person as a signing authority, and these people I sort of like, and these people I really don't like. And over time, that trustworthiness might change. But it's an interesting concept. I don't know if it's going to take off, but it's definitely worth your attention. There's a browser add-on for Firefox. You, as an end user, can run your own notary. So we can say on this threatcast, I trust John, Brian, and Nancy, and Patrick. So if they say somebody's trustworthy, I'm going to do that. And then someday you may decide that Patrick's totally out of his mind, and I'm going to drop him from my trust list. So convergence allows you to do that.
So that sounds like something similar to the whole concept that was built by THAWT, that is THAWT, some time ago, around the notion of having, basically developing a reputation for validating the identity of other individuals that wanted to have certificates. And perhaps there are some fundamental differences here, but the high-level concept sounds very similar. I was always sort of an advocate of that. I think, particularly in this day with the notion of crowdsourcing, rating applications and being able to use that, reviews of other people to help decide how you should be, choosing things. It seems like the logical approach.
Yeah, and Moxie is working with some other folks. I don't remember the names. There's just some academic institutions. So it's very possible that this is derivative on the thought.
Yeah. Cool.
And then the last one, just very, very interesting. The guys at ISAC Partners did a presentation on Apple in the age of the APT. And basically, as an enterprise, if you're concerned about APT threats and you're thinking about, bringing in the Mac platform into your business, what would an APT event look like with that platform in your environment? I think this is really important. I think everybody should read this. They have some really interesting insight into the pros and cons of using the Mac, both from an endpoint perspective technology as well as for your back end for your enterprise. So definitely, strongly recommend everybody take a chance to read through this material. I think you'll find some of it really surprising.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. DEFCON-wise, Black Hat and DEFCON are different events. Black Hat is really focused towards government contractors, the government, and large enterprises. DEFCON is a very casual social event for people in the quote-unquote security community. So if you've never been, definitely if you get the chance, I strongly recommend you try both experiences out. In terms of novel, innovative information that's coming out that really kind of shakes the industry, I didn't see a lot at DEFCON. There was an interesting project called WASP, the Wireless Aerial Surveillance Platform, which basically you had some defense contractors building a sniffing drone based on other people's work for about $6,000. And so this has been getting a lot of media attention. Having not seen one operate or actually operated one, I think it's an interesting project. I think it's very difficult to convince devices to permanently attach to a false base station, and adding the variable of a tower that's moving is going to be challenging, and also making sure that you've got adequate power to get devices to, by default, want to attach to your tower is going to be challenging. But definitely, interesting proof of concept technology. The other interesting thing about DEFCON was just the amount of hardware hacking activity that was going on was significant. They had a lot of folks that were selling hobby kits for soldering LED things and making card readers and very interesting technologies. So, the big takeaway for me in this event is really the community of people that are starting to experiment with this is really blossoming. You don't have to be really brilliant. People with security mindset are starting to do this more and more. So I would be thinking a lot about my enterprise and things like physical access controls and key cards and just generally any pieces of technology that we rely on as an access control or an authenticity mechanism. They're potentially in play now, where in the past we really were more software-oriented and network-oriented. Interesting.
So, for key takeaways from the overall event, I'd say there was a big theme at the event, which was that DNSSEC is important, and so I'm just referencing that. If you have not evaluated getting DNSSEC enabled for your business, this is something you're probably going to hear about more and more this year. And then, finally, the hardware hacking community is blowing up. So there's a lot of interesting activity going on in that space. Frankly, I am really glad that we're done with DEFCON and Black Hat for this year. I'm also really glad that this year's Black Hat and DEFCON nowhere near the same amount of excitement as in 2010 and 2009.
Yeah, that's good. So, Patrick, on the DNSSEC, I have to say that you've kind of hit a hot button for me here. One of the things, and I'm going to sort of take the devil's advocate here in the sense that I have never seen a study from anyone that has suggested in real terms what DNSSEC is actually going to protect against and how it's going to do that. And on the counterpoint, I just want to point out that we have seen DNSSEC used in DNS reflection attacks, and we also see that it's a significant increase in expense in terms of operating DNS platforms and being able to do it reliably on top of the scale that needs to be addressed. And so I just wanted to sort of voice, I'm a skeptic in terms of what DNSSEC is going to buy us. I agree with you that enterprises should be considering what it means to them. They should be talking about this with their providers, but I also have not I'm not in a position to say that it's a given that it's the proper solution going forward.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm a terrible victim for your devil's advocacy because I'm on the same page. I haven't done a rigorous study, but the subject matter experts that I rely on have been consistent in positioning the same themes that you're bringing up. You should be aware of it. You should evaluate it. But I don't know that, even in the context of what Moxie's bringing up, if it fixes problems or not. I don't know if we're replacing one problem with a slightly different variation of the same problem.
Well, in fact, arguably, without getting into the details of it at this point, but arguably it actually shifts the problem to a place that's out of the control of the potential victim. Whereas, you really want a security problem to be solved by the potential victim. It gives them the motivation to do that. This is a case where it's shifting it away to some other organization that potentially is not particularly interested in making sure that that's done well.
Well, as a business, what would DNSSEC buy me? I mean, what would be my motive what would motivate me to want to go that direction?
Well, the argument for DNSSEC is to predominantly prevent DNS cache poisoning. That is
I thought it might be, but I thought I'd ask.
Yes, it's intended to assure that how a domain name is resolved to an IP address cannot be spoofed. And it turns out that the Kaminsky patch that was put in provides a lot of capability that is a reasonable amount of protection. It's not perfect, but it provides a reasonable amount of protection in itself. But it is also possible, because of the Kaminsky patch, that it basically forces somebody that's going to perform that attack to perform many guesses, literally tens of thousands of guesses, to make that attack successful. And that's something that's relatively easy to detect as a part of the DNS infrastructure itself. So rather than put in a lot of, signing and cryptographic elements into the network, there's the potential to put in sort of an intrusion detection function into the network that will allow cache poisoning attempts to be detected and blocked. The consequence of DNSSEC is it basically makes every authoritative DNS server an amplifier. That is, a small DNS request comes in, a large answer comes out because the signature for DNSSEC is attached to the response. That is very helpful in an amplification attack or a denial of service attack, partly because DNS uses UDP. UDP allows you to spoof the source address and have the response actually go to some target of attack. So it actually becomes a consequence, which is looking to be a very difficult one to try to protect against at that point.
That was my concern too, Brian. The exact concern that I had is you've already got a large population on the Internet of people who are poorly managing and protecting their DNS servers. They're used in amplification attacks all the time. A regular one right now can do amplifications of maybe tenfold. When DNSSEC is added into it, it's going to be some order of magnitude even larger. So I see this as being a ripe target for additional DNS amplification attacks. And we know that we've seen them already to date being used to further amplify the scale that they can, of packets and packet sizes that they can send to a victim.
So just to put this into perspective, we're doing some things, obviously, behind the scenes to make sure that the correct message comes out. As we said earlier, enterprises should be evaluating DNSSEC. Don't take our word for it. There certainly is a lot of promotion activity. There are organizations that can benefit in terms of business by selling DNSSEC. They're promoting it pretty aggressively, and it becomes basically a wary purchasing organization needs to make sense of it. Thanks very much, Patrick. I think that was a very good segment. If you could go ahead and give me a presentation here.
Happy to do that.
Go ahead and move on to the weather report here. So we'll go through this fairly quickly. I wanted to share with you a number of events that have taken place in the last week or so here. First of all, I want to point out that far and foremost, the highest level of activity that we've seen is one that we've been reporting for the last couple of weeks. This is scanning activity on port 23. also related to scanning activity on port 22. We'll go ahead and take a look at that in a moment here. But let's go ahead and take a look at the top. We've got some activity. It is picked up as scanning activity on port 6257 UDP. This appears to be related to P2P activity. The thing that's odd about this particular case is it's a very spurious set of activity. So whereas it may be P2P, there may be some other motivation behind that. We're still investigating it. And it is not large scale. This is not a big scale with respect to the type of activity that we're generally analyzing. It's only in terms of hundreds of thousands of probes that we're seeing. I think the number of sources that are participating in this is less than 100 or so. It's very diverse. That is, the sources that are participating are very diverse in terms of the countries that they're coming from and the types of sources that they're coming from. So not large, not aggressive, may in fact be related to some sort of P2P, but certainly not consistent in terms of activity, and that's something that raises a flag in our mind. The next item, take a look at similar but different activity. This is UDP destination port 8090. Again, we picked this up as scanning activity in terms of the number of sources that are doing that scanning activity. This one's a little different. This is a case where it's likely a search for anonymous proxies. The activity that we're seeing here is not the evidence of that actually searching for anonymous proxies, but as you can see, we're seeing on the order of millions of probes. It's very spurious in terms of the activity, but it seems to be increasing in level. In some other research that I had done, I found basically a blog posting from Mr. Hickey Dink's UT blog here, and he observed, you can go ahead to that URL if you like, and but basically what he observed is compared with May, where he saw about 32 proxies that were using this port 8909, he identified 23,000 of them in July. So there apparently is some activity to proliferate anonymous proxies that are using this port, and perhaps that activity is probing around looking for the existing anonymous proxies that would be available. That's not necessarily a bad thing inherently, but certainly if those anonymous proxies are used for malicious behavior, that would be obviously something to be concerned about. So certainly if you're operating proxies or have evidence that port 8909 is open on any of your systems, you want to pay attention to that.
I would suspect that, this amount of a leap in anonymous proxies running on this port is probably related to some kind of botnet or malware in order to spread so rapidly on one port like that.
Absolutely. Very good observation there. So maybe I should clarify. It's possible that this port could be opened up on systems that you are operating and against your will, and so that would be something to perhaps check for. Thank you, John.
I have a question that might be kind of silly, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'm just curious. When you start seeing an increase in scanning, and as security people, the security people will be looking at that. Is there scanning involved on a security person's part generally too? And I'm wondering how much of this increase in scanning is a result of security people doing some additional scanning, as well as maybe the independent security researcher hearing about it and then jumping in too to see what's going on and see what they can find.
Well, that's actually a good question. The particular graph that I chose to show here had to do with the number of probes because I wanted to show how aggressive it was. Mm-hmm. Another perspective of this, which we generally try to show, is the number of sources that are doing that scanning activity. And if there is a strong correlation in the start and stop of that activity across many IP addresses, that's generally not security people that are doing that scanning. It's generally a botnet that's been told to go out and do that scanning activity. And so that's one of the pieces of information that we use to distinguish between some type of a malicious activity and something that might be normal security checks.
Okay.
Question? Next item, as we mentioned, the port 22 and port 23 activity. Let's go ahead and take a look at that one. There's a little bit of good news behind this. The bad news first is that this is continuing activity. We see a lot of probing activity on port 23. And we're looking here at the number of source addresses that are scanning on a per-hour basis. And this is in thousands. That is thousands of sources scanning. And typically we're peaking up around 7,000 sources per hour at peak hour. It is very diurnal in its properties right now. There's obviously some mechanization behind what's going on here. But the good news is the level of activity is tapering down. And as we had reported in previous weeks, I think we've actually reported on this in at least the last 2 weeks, predominantly these sources are in Korea. It looks like the number of sources that are just demonstrating this activity has dropped to about half of what it was previously. So that's a good news. There may be some type of remediation activity that's taking place to protect against this event. So we'll continue to watch this and report on any developments in that area.
And just as a reminder, protect your devices. If you have port 23 Telnet open or port 22 SSH open, and it's an internet-facing device, a lot of you probably have, home routers, DSL modems, etc., that might be exposing these ports that you're even not aware of. Check and make sure that they're closed off, because that's probably what this scanning activity is looking for.
Absolutely. In fact, we've started a more deliberate activity of capturing the types of passwords that are being guessed using a honeypot. And actually, to our surprise, some of these passwords are not ones that you would expect to guess. So there's some type of a seeding information that's being used in some of these cases to seek out complex passwords, apparently, that have been seen in other situations, to perhaps use that as a mechanism to capture other systems. So even certainly simple passwords are basically asking for trouble, but it's important that passwords get changed regularly and that they are diversified across different systems. Thank you, John. And last on the list here, we have some recent alarming activity associated with port 53 UDP. Port 53 UDP is obviously DNS, and what we're seeing is actually this is related to some what I would describe as spurious denial of service attack activity. We're looking at the number of packets we're seeing. This is actually a normalized measurement of packets that is the difference in comparison to what we expect to see. So from time to time, what we're seeing here is up to a 5-fold increase in the number of packets on this particular port relative to normal. It's a very strong indicator of a denial of service attack that's taken place. You can see over the last week or so, actually this is 30 days of activity, there have been a number of events of this type. So not particularly unusual activity, but certainly something to pay attention to. That is, if you're relying on DNS services, you want to make sure that your DNS services are protected from denial of service attacks, and from time to time they are targeted.
And to your point, port 53 UDP DNS, there's a lot of noise floor with that. So for something to increase by a factor of 5 on DNS is definitely a significant event. Whereas you do need to keep it, when we look at this stuff, you need to keep in mind if it's some oddball port like, 3333, where you have a almost zero noise floor of activity, a 5-fold increase is nothing. But DNS is heavily used on the internet, so that's something to keep an eye out for when you see significant movements on a very frequently used protocol.
Yeah, these are big events. These are ones that anybody that's targeted with an event like this, they're going to suffer some consequences from that. All right, thanks. Good comments there, John. So that's our report for today. As always, a reminder, if you have questions or feedback or recommendations on topics we should cover, you can contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. And this program is available from the AT&T Tech channel. That is techchannel.att.com. It's available to podcast. Just search for AT&T Cyber Threat Report on iTunes. And you can do the same from YouTube. Search for the AT&T Cyber Threat Report from YouTube, and it's available there as well. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.